All right, whoever you are, this is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and how are you? Are you new? If so, let me welcome you. If you've been here before, what's up? How's everybody doing? I'm back from my trip away. Those of you who were tuning in last week know I was in Brazil. And I'm back home now in PA, settling into my family life. Mostly this week, that's what I was doing. I was being a dad. I got home and my wife Audrey said, "Your turn." After getting pictures of me drinking coconut water from coconuts on the beaches of Copacabana, she was like, "All right, man, I get some time now." And she deserves that, of course. And I was happy to do it. I missed them. So I got to spend a bunch of time with my little girls this week. And even just being gone for like 7 days, I don't know. I come back and it seems like they both got bigger. They got older and bigger. Especially my eldest daughter, Rosalind. And those of you who've been listening for long enough might remember that I recorded a podcast with Rosalind back in December 2016. If you want to go listen to that, you can hear me and my eldest daughter have a conversation. But since that time, in like the last 2 years, wow, it's incredible how much she has developed into this like kid. Like she's just not a baby anymore, you know. She's like this kid, and she's just asserting her independence. And this week she had a performance at her school which I was not able to attend, but it was okay. She wasn't mad at me for it, I think. But she had a performance with the chorus that she's singing in at school, and she was telling me about how it went. And one of the songs that they sang in the performance was called "On Our Way to Awesome." And I jokingly said to her, "Rosalind, are you on your way to awesome?" And she said, "Actually, Dad, technically I'm not, because I'm already awesome." And I said, "Oh, Rosalind, that is an excellent answer. You are absolutely right." And for those of you who know me well enough or have been listening to this for long enough and have a sense of my philosophical viewpoint in yoga, you can imagine how much joy I got from hearing her say that. Because I never try to impart yoga to my daughters. Some part of me understands that attempting to impart yoga to my young daughters is just a ridiculous thing to do. They're already completely in yoga, just as they are. But also, I've always just felt that if I try to in any way convince them or like put it on them, I just think they would rebel against it. I don't think they have to choose it. You know, you can't make someone practice yoga. It has to come from their own inspiration. I really feel that. And I feel that with my own daughters, you know. They want to practice yoga, they'll practice yoga. And I don't try to practice with them ever. I guess I just hope that if I embody what I believe in as a yoga practitioner enough, they'll just have that example. And that's how I would communicate yoga to them. So to hear Rosalind assert her intrinsic wholeness just was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I feel like it had some special resonance because of the conversations I've been having on the podcast of late. And just the terrible situation that women face very often in our societies. And I just hope that Rosalind will continue to have that agency as she goes forward. We talk about agency and yoga practice in today's episode with Matthew Remski for sure. But before I tell you about that, let me mention that today's episode is sponsored by yoganatomy.net. And if you are interested in studying yoga anatomy or you just want some deep yoga learning, yoganatomy.net is the place to go. If you're not familiar with it, it is the online educational resource of Leslie Kaminoff and Amy Matthews. And they are friends of mine. They've been on the podcast before several times. You should go back and listen to those episodes because they speak to what they do far better than I could. And I have personally studied with both of them. In fact, if you take Leslie's principles course, you'll see me right there. I was in the group that they used for the filming of the online course, and I tend to ask a lot of questions. So you'll see me asking a bunch of questions and learning so much from Leslie. If you want to up your game, you want to have more tools to explore practice in new ways and in safer ways, I really think you should go check out yoganatomy.net. Now, as I was saying, today's episode with Matthew Remski brought into focus the larger picture of some of these issues that we've been getting at over the last few weeks, talking about the Ashtanga yoga community. If you didn't see it, Matthew had an article that came out profiling victims of abuse, and I certainly talk with him about that. But Matthew and I are friends, and we have an ongoing conversation, which we reference off of the podcast that we just sort of brought onto the podcast. And I just really appreciate the work he's doing to provide macro perspective on some of this stuff. And also, I think, getting beyond just the Ashtanga community, because it's not just the Ashtanga community, it's much bigger than that across the yoga land in general. And I think Matthew has a particular ability to provide that kind of bird's eye view. And also he's had very deep, intimate contact with the people that he's featuring, namely Karen Rain, who I've also mentioned on the podcast before. And in this talk, Matthew references something that's going to be released, a talk that he and Karen had. Well, they sent me an advanced copy of it. It's a video of Matthew interviewing Karen, and it is very powerful. It's an hour-long talk, and I think it's really like a game changer of sorts. It had a deep impact on me watching it, and I believe it's going to be released this week. I don't know the exact day yet. They weren't sure, but look for it, because later this week, this video is going to be released of Matthew talking with Karen Rain, and I think everybody should see it. Today's talk is a very good prelude to that, and I'm happy for you to listen to it today. Before we get to that, let me also drop my stuff. I'm going to be back in East Hartford, Connecticut, June 3rd. I'm going to be at the Feathered Pipe Ranch, July 14th through the 21st. And let me just say a quick thing about the Feathered Pipe Ranch gig. I was mentioning my daughters and my wife earlier. They're all coming with me to the Feathered Pipe this year, which it's never happened. I think there's only been one other occasion where I had this gig on Nantucket Island and I brought them. And other than that, in all the years that I've been teaching with children and a family, I never bring my family with me to the gigs. But after going to the Feathered Pipe last year, I just felt like I had to make it happen. So it's going to really be a family affair at the Feathered Pipe, July 14th through 21st. And I think it's going to be really special. So if you can come, please do. You can find out about these gigs and more listen to the archives of this podcast, read my new blog that came out today, and find my online yoga video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. Also, if you're listening to the podcast and you're enjoying it and getting something from it, maybe you would show us a bit of support and go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. Those gestures are really helpful, and we'd sure appreciate it if you did that stuff. Okay, I will touch base with you on the other side, tell you who's coming on next week, and, just touch base on a few things. But let's go ahead now and listen to this very important talk that I had with my friend, Matthew Remski.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I just listened to your intro to Scott Johnson. I didn't listen to what Scott had to say, but I really appreciated the intro. It was good.
Well, thanks. There was still some debate about it, I guess. I just default to transparency, and not everybody always thinks that's a good idea.
Right.
But for me, it's like where I feel most comfortable.
Right.
So thanks. But what else? What's been going on? How's your day going? It's the middle of the day for you too, right?
It is. And I was just got up from a nap alongside the almost 2-year-old Owen. And that was really good because I was up until about 1:30 in the morning after doing another interview with my friends Colin Hall and Sarah Garden at Bodhi Tree in Regina. So it took me a while to come down off of that. But the sun is shining. We got some backyard cleaning done over the weekend. We emptied out the basement. So things are heading in an upward arc, it feels, in many ways.
Yeah, well, you mentioned 2.5 years for your son, right? Your son, and
two. He's going to be 2 in May 17th.
Well, we last spoke. The last time you were on the podcast was May 2016.
Oh my goodness! Was he born or not born?
I guess he wouldn't have been born because it's exactly 2 years ago.
Right. Wow.
But we spoke about that book that you wrote with Michael Stone about becoming fathers and stuff.
Right.
I remember. And I can't believe it's been 2 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, we've been in touch since.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I feel that the difference between the podcast and being on the phone is a little bit thin.
That's true, actually. And, that's a good point, because sometimes when, like I had Peter Blackaby on, and I had not had other conversations with him other than the 2 that you hear on the podcast, but you and I have had many conversations. So.
Right.
So there's a through line there.
Yeah.
And gosh, so much has happened. And, when we last spoke, we were talking about Wawadia still.
Yes.
And right at the end of that, like we were saying, oh, it's going in different directions, and people were sort of, I think, upset back then, and maybe still, that it started out as like, what poses hurt you, what poses don't hurt you, or, you know what I mean? Like people wanted to sort of have some like, how to make the practice safe and clear, simple answers. And you were like, I've looked at it and I don't know that those exist. And you were saying that it was going in this direction of like the interpersonal dynamics that were going on.
Yeah, that's a good summary, actually. It took about 2 years to figure out that I was barking up kind of a dissociative tree. That, when the hard data is really laid out, as I think you yourself suggested those years ago, and perhaps before that as well, we don't really see that yoga is any more damaging physically to anybody than any other physical activity. In fact, it's probably safer. So when that was clear, for a moment I held on to this notion that the problem with yoga injuries is the problem of expectation, that people get involved in this practice for therapy and spiritual healing, and why it seems very bizarre that they would hurt themselves, that they would develop repetitive stress or chronic pain. So I held on to that for a while, but the trying to hang a narrative on a research narrative on that premise became a lot less important than realizing the kinds of stories I was overlooking or I was papering over in the midst of all of the interviews that I was doing with people who had injured themselves or who had been injured by teachers. And a couple of key things happened that kind of spun me around. And one of them was that, Diane Bruni was an early supporter of the work, and she was one of my first interviews, and she told me about the correlation between overuse, repetitive stress, and her hip injury coming out of the Ashtanga world. And I interviewed her. It was a really compelling interview. She loved the project. She was a big supporter, and she wanted to host this event at her home studio in Parkdale here in Toronto. And so we advertised it. It was going to be under the banner / branding of Wawadia, or my project. And 60 people showed up, and she was going to speak on her injury experience. I was going to give my initial research that was related to the psychosocial dynamics of injury. And then we had also a sports medicine doctor who was going to come, and he was going to do a little bit of statistical analysis on who got hurt when and where and how. And Diane was going first, and she just did not follow the plan. That's not really her jam. So it wasn't unexpected, but at the same time, what she began talking about was really outside of what I felt the scope of my project should be. She started talking about the whisper network that she had encountered in the late 1990s that informed her that Pattabhi Jois was allegedly assaulting female students. And she described how that led her into a kind of crisis of faith and professional choices, like how was she going to associate herself with a system where this was true, and the information that she had was credible. And so she told this story, and I was sitting there gripping my meditation cushion, listening to her say it and thinking, this wasn't in the program. This wasn't part of the deal. And
sorry to jump in, but I remember when I spoke to her, she came to Brooklyn and I met her, and she came on the podcast and we talked, but she talked a lot more about actually ripping up her hip, and then stuff that she felt was wrong with the Ashtanga having to do with just biomechanics and stuff.
Right.
She didn't necessarily, we might have gone, and I don't really remember some, but it wasn't the focus of our conversation at that time.
Well, okay, so here's the thing is that, and this is where I think you and I as media people in the yoga world have this interesting interaction. If you interviewed her after that event, you might have been, you might have been the recipient of the fact that I had silenced her. Because what happened at the event was that we had planned to have it videoed, and so that whole first section was on video, and
I saw it. I remember seeing some video of you guys doing that session.
No, you didn't see the story she told though, because I actually convinced her to drop it. I said, look, the stories aren't corroborated. You're not naming your source. I'm a little bit concerned about legal liability. I had all of these great, rationalizations for encouraging her to desist. And by the way, we're very close friends, and we have talked this out since. And I have given her my sincere apology for what ended up being about a 6-month to a year-long contribution that I made actually to the silencing of this story. Because I really felt that the sex scandal genre was a kind of, dumpster fire of controversy and, and confusion. And there are specific reasons that I felt that way that are not just personal.
Oh, well, I remember when we spoke last, we were talking about the Jiva Mukti thing.
Right.
And I just know that you have often used Facebook as a little bit of a litmus test for things, it seems to me. And so I could kind of understand why you were being super careful, because that's what people were always coming after you. That's what people still come after you about, in terms of just like being too sensational and not sourced or whatever.
Right. And that does play into it. That does play into it. But there's something, I think, there's something deeper to investigate there, and that is that I believed somehow that these two forms of harm were separated and separable. That somehow the somatic dominance that that Diane Bruni, and then of course the 9 women who came forward for the Walrus article, are describing in terms of assault, is of a piece with attitudes of somatic dominance that are registered in the tissues. And so, I wanted to really pull those apart. But I think, and I also began to realize that the discussion around injuries in yoga was so charged, because there was this underlying theme that wasn't actually being addressed. It's like, why are we so upset about repetitive stress injuries, and why are we really trying to figure out what the best way of doing Trikonasana is? It seemed to be carrying a lot more than, okay, let's improve our technique when we're doing spin class. It was fraught with not just the expectations of therapy and spiritual, equanimity, but also it was fraught with, I believe, this unspoken set of grievances about how we had been taught or how we had been held in the community. So I think by the time Diane got to you, she had already sort of been taught by somebody somebody who's like you, which is me, that this really isn't the time or place to talk about this stuff. And it's what's so strange is that all of the arguments that I presented to her were a kind of hyper-rationalized version of, the arguments that had buried the or made people's responses to that infamous video of adjustments inconclusive, right? Mm-hmm. The whole thing, all of the, that video popped up for years.
Yep, I remember seeing it. Yeah.
I remember what people would say. They would say, oh, we don't actually know what he's doing.
It looked bad, but I didn't trust it because it's just an out of context clip on the internet. And
right.
I wouldn't damn somebody on an out of context clip on the internet because I don't trust that.
Right. There's that. So there's the credibility of the technology, but then there's also when there's the acknowledgement of what's actually happening in the physical contact, it's like, well, these encounters are taking place in, the intense and well-defined parameters of, long-term teacher-student relationship or guru-student relationship. These are advanced practitioners. They know what they're doing. They know what they signed up for. Obviously he's touching men and women in the same way. Actually, obviously he's not. But so there was this endless round of equivocation that I really think infected me. It poisoned me in a way, to such an extent that I was looking through my emails yesterday to try to figure out when the video started to really catch my attention. And it was my friend Carol Horton in 2013 who sent it to me, and she said, have you seen this thing? It's really awful. It's disturbing. And I wrote back to her, and I saw my reply, and it said, oh yeah, I've seen it. It is awful. Oh, and then I don't know if I changed the subject or I don't know. It's just, I didn't follow up on it. And I think what was going on was that one of the many things was that, in the absence of there being audible voices, it was just too easy to equivocate over the imagery. And, for the longest time, I thought, well, nobody's spoken out about this, but I was actually wrong. In 2010, Annika Lucas published a blog post that she just reissued in 2016. It had disappeared because the website, you probably remember it, Yoga in New York City.
I do, I remember. But it was the problem was when, not it was a problem, but I remember there was the whole thing going on with Yoga for New York, and they were trying to regulate the teacher training programs. Mm-hmm, and we raised money and got lobbyists and actually stopped that. That was one of the first times that kind of happened. And in the meetings that we had for Yoga New York, this issue came up in those discussions. But I remember being at the time feeling like it was a distraction from the other issue.
Right. Right. I mean, and that's the horrible, it's this unintentional sort of fog of neglect and rape culture and kind of just low expectations that really delays the story coming out. So Annika publishes this thing in 2010. She clearly says, I was groped this way. This is what it felt like. And this is how I confronted him 2 days later. And you could go back and you can find her post. When you put this up, I'll put it into the comments.
She said it on the podcast. She came on the podcast long before the Me Too thing happened. We talked about this last time she came on, and I remember. I mean, guess because she also told her personal story, which is also so mind blowing. And then she also mentioned that, but I guess it just at the time seems so crazy. It's hard to. What's interesting to me right now is I think we share something in that you've been interviewing people, as have I, in a sense, and doing that and then going back and observing yourself and your behavior when you're talking to people about these things, which is just sort of a natural for what we're doing, this media thing or whatever. Right. It reveals stuff. I always talk about it on the podcast, and you see, oh crap, look at that, in yourself. Right. And I do think that's been happening for me a lot recently. And that's what I was talking about on the podcast this week, that trying to address these things as someone who's starting conversations often means having to do it in yourself and failing sometimes or something.
Oh, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, I can tell you for sure that getting to the point where I could actually listen just did not come naturally to me. And it really took the patience of people like Diane Bruni, who when I'm talking to her about I don't think that releasing that part of the video is a good idea if we want to keep the focus on safety in asana practice. And she's like, but what I'm saying is true. And she, looks at me with this face where she's half exhausted, half disappointed. And I'm like, yeah. And what am I supposed to do about it? And there's a problem right there. It's like you immediately sort of jump into what you think should be your problem solving mode into just better listenership. And so that was a very hard lesson that I had to learn, and it was really out of those conversations with Diane that I started to pursue the stories. I reached out to Annika. Annika put me in touch with Marissa Sullivan. Marissa Sullivan put me in touch with Maya Hammer. Maya Hammer was Diane Bruni's student in Toronto, and then this sort of this network emerged, and all I had to do was to reassociate myself with the awful sensations that I felt while watching that video, and to not push them to the side, to not say, I don't want to deal with that, or I don't know what's going on there, because I was nauseated when I saw that video. I'm not the victim of sexual assault, but I am a victim of male violence, and I know what somatic domination feels like in my body, and I had a sense of what generally was happening in the depiction of that physical contact, but I just, I did not, put it together with, oh, this may well be predatory behavior.
Well, it makes me think a little bit of what I think it was Theo wrote recently. It might have been Karen, but I think it was Theo when she was just saying that listening to the realities of this, it's nobody wants to do it. It just feels so terrible. And I know I keep bringing it up on the podcast and then just kind of buddying it off because I want to talk about it because I think we need to, but it feels so horrible and I don't want to, so you avoid it.
Right. And so there's a couple of things like, Theo Wildcroft, I'll put the link to this in too. I published a little thing where I just quoted from a conversation she and I had over Skype about how the story of the trauma survivor is actually contagious. We feel that we will be infected by it. We feel that it will change our world. It will have to change our perspective on everything, on how everything works together, on what right and wrong is, on who's in control, on whether or not something is good or something is bad. And the deeper sense of infectability, I guess, is that you might begin to reorganize your own memories in a different light. There might be some reframing that you'll have to go through if you hear Karen Rain describe something that sounds pretty familiar, but you didn't think of it that way, and then, oh no, is that something that you have been carrying in some unconscious way as well? Karen Rain is a wonderful example of the type of voice that is so hard to listen to because she has zero fucks to give. She has no social capital to win or lose within the yoga world. She has spent 20 years metabolizing her experience. You know what? I want to take that back. It's not that she has zero fucks to give. It's that she is able to speak outside of, because she cares very deeply. Actually, I know that about whether or not this continues or whether or not it can be improved or healed. Where she has nothing to lose is in the social capital department.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think when you first said it, what I took was that she doesn't have any professional skin in the game, and
not at all.
To me, that's sort of why I have kind of looked to her, and I've had a chance to talk with her because she's in that video. And everybody who got into Ashtanga in the early days knows that video. It's it's the icon of Ashtanga coming to the West or something. And she's in that. And we all recognize other people from that video who went on to have these yoga careers. But
all five of them.
Well, there you go. I didn't even know that offhand, but she didn't go on to have a yoga career, and this is why. And now it's coming out.
It's not just didn't go on to have a yoga career. She couldn't have a yoga career, and I think this is a very important thing to draw out. Of those 6 people, Karen was one of them. Her name was Haberman then, and then we have Tim Miller, we have Chuck Miller, Mahdi Azrati, Eddie Stern, Tim Miller, and Richard Freeman. And all of them went on to have lifelong, to this day, careers in the broadcast of this method. And then we have somebody who completely vanishes. And, I had been aware of the video. And then when I was actually visiting with and interviewing Elizabeth Kadetsky in New York City in maybe 2015 or so, she said, you should try to get in touch with Karen because I learned Ashtanga from her in New Jersey in the early 2000s. And she had a lot of interesting things to say about her experience in Mysore. But I think she's changed her name. And then I had to I had to do this detective work to find her phone number and then call her up out of the blue. And her outsidership to this entire industry is so perfect, and yet it's so radioactive. And I think that's why it is extraordinarily difficult for anybody to even consider inviting her onto a panel, or like, has she done any podcasts anywhere? Like, there's been a couple of public meetings on this particular issue, and as far as I know, she has not gotten any invitations, and it's because the actual voice of the victim carries something that must be addressed. It cannot be equivocated. It cannot be turned into a photograph or a video that can be reinterpreted. The person is standing right there, and they're telling you exactly what happened, and they're telling you exactly what would help them. And it's no mystery anymore, right? So you can't stand there and you can't say, well, I wonder what they want. I wonder what would be good, or, I wonder what we should do about this going forward. All of those, somewhat self-oriented concerns just have to dissolve, actually. So
I hear that. I mean, having had a chance to speak with her and have that exact conversation with her, I felt like it had a big impact on me. I know that has affected like how I'm having the conversation a lot. And I guess trying to sort of think of the other side of the conversation in terms of why she's not getting invited. I've had that conversation a little bit with some friends, and one of the things that someone brought up, which I thought was maybe valid point, maybe not, is that, I think people are a bit afraid because I know even when I was talking to her, like I said a stupid thing or two, and she was very sweet and gracious to like help educate me. Right. But it was touchy, and I guess people are worried. I guess people don't necessarily know that she would want to be on those panels, but you got to ask to find out, I guess, right?
Well, you have to. A, you have to ask to find out. B, you're going to make mistakes. C, if you show good faith and you say, yeah, there is obviously something here that I have to learn, then 9 times out of 10 people in Karen Rain's position, if they have the energy on that particular day, are going to probably respond to that earnestness and say, yes, well, out of my desire to help other victims or to improve the culture in general, here's what would be helpful. And I can say now that the number of mistakes that I made in communicating with Karen was really almost like sometimes I wonder about the amount of patience she had with me, actually, because I don't have her experience. And not only do I not have her experience, but I have never encountered somebody who's been able to there are many people who can do it, but this is my first personal encounter with somebody who can speak so clearly to the facts and to the effects and to the meanings. And so I'll tell you about one thing that I did was when we were going back and forth in our interview process, and that was long. It took place over about a year and a half, actually. And there's a development story to that too, which we'll describe in a future interview, she and I. But at one point, she decided she was going to make her Me Too statement, and we were talking about that, and I was asking her, how she felt and things, and then in the wake of making that statement, I began tracking the responses, and we were discussing the responses, and one of the things that she was very clear about with me was, I am triggered by seeing his photograph. That has a negative impact upon my nervous system. It makes me feel in these ways, and so that's very hard for me. And what did I do when I was, giving her kind of like reports on how people were responding in their blog posts? I kept sending her just links to people's blogs where Joyce's face is right at the top, beaming, and it took her. I don't know how many of those I did before she said, "You've got to stop doing that." And I think when she initially said that, I didn't even know what she was talking about. There's just a level of otherness to that experience that I just couldn't grasp, and so I made mistakes, and it's really in making those mistakes and having them pointed out through the patience that she showed that that I feel I've been able to go to college or something in
oh, I know. I feel like just trying to have the conversation has been a huge education for me, and it does seem to go beyond like how much of the more recent revelations and the reasons that we're like listening to it maybe in ways now that we weren't before are just because of the Me Too phenomena.
I think it's integral. I mean, when Karen describes why she wanted to make her statement, she says in this forthcoming interview that she the Me Too movement came, and she said, "Well, I know that I have been sexually assaulted by somebody famous, and I have to do my part." There's a paradigmatic listening shift that in the yoga world has its own crisis and conflict. In a way, the Me Too movement has had this profound effect on yoga culture so far, but at the same time, it has also encountered particular resistances that are related to the narratives that yoga people like to tell about themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Like nobody looked to Harvey Weinstein as a benevolent grandfather who was also, a spiritual master. Being disillusioned about him is not so painful. Everybody knew that the guy was off and cruel. So there's this extra layer of cognitive dissonance and idealization and mystification that Me Too has to break through, and so I think it's happening in a unique way in the yoga world, and in some places it's taking a little bit longer than it should, but it's definitely happening.
Well, that goes a little bit back to me where we started, in the sense that, like, if you start out trying to figure out why you're hurt from you're doing all this yoga practice and that you manifest like chronic pain, which is what happened to me. Mm-hmm. And you start to examine, why that is. And maybe even you start a project called What Are We Actually Doing in Asana because of that. Uh-huh. And then you first look to some technical things, right? And you can identify things that you think might be it. Like, oh, maybe triangle pose is a problem. Right. You sort of find some technical things that you think may be the answer. But when you examine deeper, as you said at the beginning, like get into these conversations with A.B. Matthews and Peter Blackaby, and you're like, but wait, is that really the reason?
Right.
And when you start to look at it, it really comes back for me to something that you threw out there, and it's a term that I think is kind of an important term, this term, somatic dominance.
Right. Right.
And I think of it in two ways. There's sort of the somatic dominance of the way a certain teacher and student relate, but there's even like a somatic dominance against my own body.
Right. Well, I think those two things are inseparable, actually. Mm. That the self relationship, the self objectification, the struggle with one's own body, in some way, has got to be internalization, and who knows which one comes first of the dominant pedagogy that one engages, and I think that in a way that's the core theme of the Wawadia project, and it was really these stories of criminal acts, of boundary transgressions, of sexual assault and harassment that made the wider theme of dominance as it plays out in subtler ways, in non-sexual ways, but ways that are equally expressive of unequal power dynamics, That's really the core. And it's one of the factors. I think it's one of the factors that contributes to the silencing of personal experience. When I think about, I used to go to Diane Bruni's classes, but I was never in an Ashtanga community, and I never practiced Mysore style, and I don't think I would have tolerated adjustments for very long. Although who knows? That's the thing about being inducted into a system of influence, is that you really can't predict what you're going to accept, depending upon what you're told about it. But having not had that experience, when I imagine what it must be like to spend years, every morning, 6 days a week, really placing yourself into the hands of the person who will mold you into the shape that you can't quite attain yourself. That is enormous. That has to have such profound effects upon other ways in which you would relate to that authority figure. And I think it goes along too with the general report of the silence within the culture. Now, this is not unique to Ashtanga, but the number of people who have described being in those practice rooms and not having time to speak openly with the teacher about how something felt, or to give them feedback, or to tell them that they were hurt, or to speak with them after class, or to have tea with them, or whatever. That kind of deep, involved, close, intimate, claustrophobic, almost somatic space in which a very powerful set of sensations is being negotiated, it's not really given to stepping back and having a conversation. It's not really. You would have to reorient your entire way of communicating with that teacher in order to step back and say, "Hey, can you tell me a little bit about what you knew about Pattabhi Jois and his relationship to his women students?"
Yes.
Like that would be that in order to do that, you would have to completely reorient yourself somatically towards the person you were speaking to. And so I think that the whole sort of landscape of one body expressing power over another, or offering itself as a gateway to another's experience that they can't attain themselves, that is, that's kind of like that's both the root of, to me, the Wadia project now, but also it's like it's the sphere of influence that circulates out from the the terrible stories detailed in the Walrus article.
Well, I've been thinking about what you're pointing to a lot, because I just had this conversation with Scott Johnson, and he and I are kind of the same generation, where we didn't go to India and meet the gurus and have like a direct connection to them. Our teachers were like the Westerners who went and did that.
Right.
And so I didn't have any, like, I don't know, the picture of Pattabhi Jois was up on the altar, and I was just sort of taught to revere them as the living masters.
Right.
But it was sort of secondhand through my teachers. But my teachers, at least the ones that I went to, they didn't set themselves up in that same way with me. Like they may have had a certain, like I said it on the podcast, that like the in is the teacher, rather than the in being things that teacher taught other people or something.
Right.
So there's sort of like this difference. And, I want to come back to what you're saying, because it goes back to the connection between why doing really hard assists and like popping someone's hamstring connector relates to like sexual abuse in the space. Like this idea of somatic dominance and even in some of the Ashtanga teachers I've been speaking to who don't have this direct connection to Pattabhi Jois as their guru, they still have learned to do these assists.
Right.
And some of them, even when someone's in Paschimottanasana and they lay on top of them on their back,
right.
Like some of them aren't crazy, like trying to pull your leg behind your head.
Right.
But when I spoke to these very thoughtful Ashtanga teachers who I think are being incredibly thoughtful, Scott and Sarai, they're really tackling these things, you know?
Right. Yeah, I know.
But when I asked them specifically about this, I asked Sarai, do you still do them? And she said, I will if someone wants me to, but I do them in a different way. But she could hear in her voice, there's this question of that, there's a consent often given to them to lay on their back when they're in Paschimottanasana, but that dynamic of teaching is sort of what we're talking about. I don't do that anymore. I don't put my weight on anybody like that anymore,
right.
Because of this sense of dominance to it. Even if someone wants me to do it in a way,
right.
For me personally, what I've come to in my own practice and why I do it, it's not the space where someone could have a conversation with me. It's what you're saying. To me, they connect. I am there after class, and if you want to talk to me about whatever, that's what I'm most interested in, actually.
Right. So I think that there's so many things going on with the squish that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. From the practitioners that I've spoken to. Some students will develop relationships with teachers where that is a moment of deep, sweet, intimate connection that feels safe because they've built up a field of trust between them over a long period of time. And then some people feel as though it's something that they have tolerated for a while, and some people didn't.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.